Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, September 11th, 2014, 7:30 p.m. Brisbane City Hall. Call to order.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Present.
Commissioner Doe.
Present.
Commissioner Manier.
I'm here on time.
Commissioner Parker. Here. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Here.
Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Anybody like to adopt the agenda?
I motion that we adopt the agenda.
Have a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to the consent calendar. Let's just approve this all in one fell swoop unless somebody wants to pull anything out of that and discuss it separately.
Works for me.
No, it's fine.
I motion that we approve the draft action minutes of April 10th, July 24th, and August 7th of 2014.
Yes.
I was just going to make a comment on these minutes of the meetings.
Yes.
They are so condensed that there is no way to really figure out what went on.
Do you remember what went on in April? Because I don't.
Well, the thing is, like we are going to submit 2 of these to the City Council. And if I read this, it doesn't tell me very much at all as to what's going on. So again, I emphasize that we should have a little bit more detailed minutes of the meetings. It used to be that way, and for budget cuts or whatever the reason was, we decided.
Hey, Jamil, do you have your microphone on?
It wasn't on.
There we go.
So for the reason of budget cuts or whatever the reason was, we condensed it so much that it doesn't tell you very much at all as to what was discussed. And so that's my point again to the whosoever is responsible for that. But other than that, I'll go ahead with approving the minutes of the meeting.
Okay. Ken, do you want to make any comments on that? Why these minutes have been condensed so far?
So, several years ago, before the Great Recession, we had an outside contractor, if you will, that we sent the recordings to, and she did more detailed. They weren't verbatim minutes, but they were much more detailed than these. And then we'd bring them. She'd send them back to staff for review. Then they'd come to the commission. But with the budgetary constraints, the City Council decided that this should be done by staff, and since they were to be done by staff, less time needed to go into those, and so they said they should be action minutes. These are a little bit expanded, actually, from the original action minutes that were intended, and for those items that are on relating to 7000 Marina, we've expanded them even more. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, but the thing is, I only see a couple of sentences regarding my involvement in this, and there was a lot more discussion than that. So if you're anybody reading that can get the flavor of what went on. But I hope that the council will review the video.
Right, I respect your concerns, and I believe the council. I can't speak for all of them, but I think they generally probably do go back to the DVDs as well on these. But again, I can't speak for them, but those are.
Okay.
Any other comments on that? Okay, then somebody like to make a motion to move with the consent calendar?
I made the motion, so we can have a second.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we move on to oral communications.
No, adoption.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the adoption.
Number 2.
Adoption.
That was
That was the consent calendar, and I said that includes
Oh,
everything on the
no,
calendar.
I actually thought we could make a report. I heard you say that it was for the draft
Action minutes. Yeah.
action minutes. I would like to discuss the adoption.
Okay, no, I did say the entire consent calendar, but go ahead.
So for the adoption of the report, as a group, are we going to make a report?
Through the chair, your report is essentially just a compilation of the record. So it will include the agenda reports, the minutes, any correspondence on an item, and so that's essentially the second page or the back page of your agenda report that's included in your packet. Would be that cover that would go to City Council along with the record. So that is the report. It's not the intent in the ordinance of providing this report is not for the Planning Commission to defend its decision. It's essentially to transmit the information to the City Council
Right.
to consider.
Okay, so if we have some comments to make about our decision, then we should make it at the city council meeting? Great,
Yes.
thank you.
What I will add in the letter to the council would be that you can attach the copies of the DVDs attached also with this report as part of the report.
Sure, we can make it clear that's available and where it's available on the website.
Yeah.
We're glad to add that.
Okay, do we have to change this now that, okay, great. Carolyn, did you have anything else you needed to say on this matter?
No, I got the clarification I wanted.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So, moving forward to item E, oral communications.
Through the chair, do we need to redo
That's why.
that motion? And okay, all right.
All right,
So that
let's
stands.
do it again just to be sure.
Okay.
Okay, so let's approve the consent calendar.
I motion that we approve the consent calendar. That includes items 1 and 2.
Thank you.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We good?
Thank you.
Okay. Oral communications, one more try. The oral communications is a limit to a total of 15 minutes, typically for things that are not on the agenda. I do have 3 slips here from people in the audience who would like to speak regarding the housing element. So would you all like to wait until we get to the housing element to make your comments? Okay, thank you. So if there's anybody else who has anything to talk about that is not on the agenda tonight, I move to close the oral communications. Okay, written communications. We have a letter from Doug Ryder, which we'll go into in more detail regarding the subcommittee report on the green building ordinance. But if you have a moment to glance over that before we get to that, please do. I also have something from the taking stock of the water supply, the Bay Area Monitor. That is the only written communications that I have right now. New business is public hearing, 645 Humboldt Road, use permit UP-1-14, use permit to modify the parking requirements to allow for an addition of approximately 95 square feet home office accessory structure under the existing parking deck for an existing single-family home with a secondary dwelling unit to include the existing 5 parking spaces, 4 standard and 1 compact, where 6 spaces are required. Jerry Cool applicant, Rafael Martinez owner, APN 007-425-080. And Vern, I need to hand this over to you because I need to recuse myself. I can't vote on this matter.
While she does that, I'm going to dim the lights from the room. The applicant requests approval of use permit to modify the parking standards for 645 Humboldt Road. The site is developed with a single-family dwelling and a secondary dwelling unit. The secondary dwelling unit was approved in 1986, and following its approval, the parking standards were modified by the city, rendering this site non-conforming for parking. It has 5 parking spaces, whereas 6 are currently required. The modification is requested to allow for construction of an approximately 95 square foot accessory structure intended for a home office under the existing parking deck. Since the site includes 2 dwelling units and not just a single-family residence, no expansion of floor area may be allowed unless either the parking is modified to accommodate the 6 required spaces or a use permit is granted. By way of background, in 2002, the Planning Commission approved a use permit for a similar proposal. That proposal was to add a 125 square foot room under the deck. However, the applicant never constructed it, and the permit expired in 2004. Then in 2013, a stop work order was issued for construction of the room, shown on the agenda in the agenda report, since there was no building permit at that time. So the proposed room has been partially constructed. If the Planning Commission approves the application, the owner will need to obtain a building permit to complete that room. The proposed application meets all of the required findings for Planning Commission approval as detailed in the agenda report. In brief, since the single-family home and secondary dwelling unit to which the parking requirements are tied are already existing, there would be no increase in the parking demand. Also, through the conditions of approval and the requirements for home occupations, the proposed home office would not be permitted to generate additional traffic or parking demand. It's worth noting that the proposed parking for this site of 5 spaces would be conforming with the Planning Commission's recommendation to the parking ordinance update. That recommended ordinance included 4 parking spaces for single-family homes over 1,800 square feet, plus 1 space for secondary dwelling units, which would be under 900 square feet, which that's how this home is configured in the secondary unit. So in this case, the home includes approximately 2,000 square feet of living space, and the existing secondary unit is approximately 470 square feet. However, the parking ordinance is still under review with the City Council subcommittee, so that's not filed yet, those proposed changes. Finally, approval of this application has some precedence. The Planning Commission approved a use permit for 340 Kings in 2009 for 4 parking spaces. This was for a slightly smaller home and slightly smaller secondary dwelling unit, but there has been others as well in the past that are very similar to this. And although that home and the secondary dwelling unit were about 1,600 square feet and a 370, as I recall, for the SDU, it was for 4 parking spaces, not 5, so it was even less parking. So there is precedent here. In closing, staff recommends conditionally approving use permit UP 113, the adoption of the resolution.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
So did the commission want to have any questions for Ken?
The only question I have is the proposal from the Planning Commission has not been approved by the council yet, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so if we do approve this particular, the proposal here, how that will impact in case the council says no, we want 6 parking spaces?
It would be completely separate. This use permit for parking is granted based on the findings that you have in the staff report, and it would stand specific to this site, whereas the city council, if it were to adopt your recommendations, that would apply citywide, so there's no special permit. So the use permit for parking is site-specific.
But the question I have is that it will be a citywide requirement, and now this is already will be grandfathered out?
Well, if the city council were to approve as per Planning Commission's recommendation, the use permit would become a moot point because they would be compliant.
But if not?
But if not, the use permit would continue to stand in full force.
Okay. I always admire this house, looking at the aquarium theme. When I walk by there, I always see that. I do remember in 2009 we did approve the part of this, and I really don't have any objection to this, but I don't know the others. You can
Carolyn?
speak your mind.
Right. I do have some questions for the applicant.
So,
Do you have any anyone else have any questions for staff?
Not for staff. I'd
Not for
like
staff?
to hear from the applicant, but not for staff, no.
so can we have the applicant come up and speak?
Hi, my name is Jerry Cool.
Hi.
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 I was the applicant for this. How can I help you?
So, including the 95 square feet, the building is going to, the upper floor is going to be 2,095 square feet, or
It's not the,
I'm
that's the
confused.
total, he's talking about the total square footage of the primary dwelling.
the primary dwelling is going to be 2,000 square feet,
Roughly, yes.
including the 95.
Yeah, I think it's 2,100 roughly, yes.
Okay, so it's 2,100. So, my question is, how is this different from a bedroom? It's being made into a library, but how would that be different? I mean, could it be called a 4-bedroom house?
It's only 6 feet wide. You'd be hard pressed to get a bed in it.
So it's 6
For one.
feet wide.
It's basically, it's 6 feet wide by 15 feet long.
Okay, that was my question.
And it's also not attached to the rest of the building. It's basically under, the parking structure is not attached to the existing structure. There's a deck in between it. So it's really just kind of off to the side.
If I may, through the chair, just to add on to that, you have a condition of approval B, which will be a declaration of restrictions that will be required as prior to the building permit. That would it would carry with the ownership of the land. So it's recorded with the county, which would restrict this from becoming a sleeping quarters.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was my question. So.
So that was basically my question.
So the 470 square feet is the secondary
Yes.
dwelling unit.
So you're going to order 2 bunk beds, right?
Me? No, I'm not ordering anything.
So so it says basically there's 5 parking places, but then there's an area that could actually work as a.
Yes, I actually have photographs of that area.
Right.
It is, here, let me give you,
Front of the front door. Yeah. We can share. There you go.
even though that does not, it is a non-compliant space, it is currently being used as a parking space.
Okay. I think those are all my questions.
Okay,
Yep.
That's it?
thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Do you want to see if anyone else wants?
You want to
Does
open
anyone-
up the public hearing?
Does anyone else want to speak to this application? Do the owners have anything to add or say? Okay.
Okay. I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do I?
Yes. I'll second it.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, so
All in favor is aye.
Aye.
do we have any further discussion or are we?
We're going to have discussion about this.
we're good.
I already suggested that we should go ahead and approve
Okay.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
I
anybody
agree.
else
I
has
agree.
any concerns? Then
I
We
don't
should
have any
approve it.
concerns.
so I make a motion to approve the use permit UP-1-14.
Can we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Congratulations. Welcome back, Chairperson.
Okay, moving on to old business. Public hearing, draft 2015 to 2022 housing element, general plan amendment, GPA-1-14, City of Brisbane applicant, citywide.
The Planning Commission held 8 study sessions on the draft housing element through the first half of this year, then held a public hearing during its last meeting on August 28th. The Commission continued this item to tonight in order to have more time to review Appendix E, which came to the Commission separately from the rest of the document. Appendix E is the detail which essentially goes to Table 35, which you had in your document originally. Also, although DCT, the property owner of the sites along the south side of Park Lane, expressed general support of the housing element during the public hearing in August, DCT expressed concern that the proposed housing overlay not restrict ongoing and future use of nearby industrial and commercially zoned property. Staff concurs that the introduction of the residential overlay zone needs to balance creating a suitable residential environment with maintaining the viability of nearby industrial and commercial properties. Staff included a revised program in the agenda report to address this. In closing, staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward the draft housing element update to City Council with the recommendation that it be forwarded to HCD for review. The Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council would be via adoption of the resolution provided in the agenda report. Please note that time is of the essence at this point, since after council review, this would need to go to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, which has 60 days to review the draft element. Then it needs to come back to council for adoption, and all that's to be done before the end of January. So we're on a fairly short time frame. I know you have at least a couple slips. I know one is from DCT, so they may want to comment on the proposed language.
Okay. So I do have 3 slips here. Alan or David, who would like to go first? State your name for the record, please.
Alan Murphy. I'm an attorney with Perkins Coie in San Francisco and appearing on behalf of DCT Industrial, owner of several properties in Brisbane in the Crocker Park. And I'm here this evening to present a letter to the Community Development Director, but also with copies to all of you. And should I?
Thank you.
Thank you.
As you'll see in the letter, and as you already understand from the staff report, DCT has been working with staff on the housing element, and as it stands right now, there is an overlay proposed for affordable housing over 3 DCT properties. They're at 9199 Park Lane, 105 115 Park Lane, and 145 Park Lane. And DCT is open to the idea of an overlay. We understand the need for affordable housing in the community and have no issue with that. The problem are 2 specific programs that have been proposed as part of the housing element here. And these are housing element programs HD2A and HD2B. The concern over these programs is that they may represent an effort to change existing zoning or other regulations to limit existing uses in future development. That's HD2A. Or HD2B would be to eliminate or reduce certain existing operations and uses to accommodate future housing. And essentially, those 2 programs would go beyond the current overlay proposal to potentially have further restrictions on adjacent uses and potentially on DCT's operations. And Dave Hogan from DCT can comment more on DCT's operation and contribution to the community. But our concern here is that a thriving business could have restrictions put on it through these future zoning changes, and the programs are just so open-ended that it suggests that potentially these changes, they potentially are something that would be of serious concern. So really, again, we're open to the overlay, and all we're asking here tonight is to strike the 2 programs from the housing element update. We don't think that would in any way undermine the housing element, the affordable housing overlay. And in fact, the city's own environmental initial study and negative declaration for the housing element provides that there are no significant impacts even before mitigation from including the affordable housing overlay in the housing element. So because there's no significant impacts of having housing here near the existing operations, due to a number of programs, we believe that it's unnecessary to have the two programs here. And specifically with regard to emissions, which has been raised, there are several measures already included in the initial study and then also included in the housing element discussing how residential uses would be protected from emissions from trucks that go in and out of the industrial park. So because those measures are already in place and included in the housing element, we believe that those two programs are unnecessary, and we'd like to ask respectfully ask that they be deleted. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Did you review the revised program HD2B?
Yes, we have, and we absolutely appreciate staff's willingness to work with us here. The concern, again, though, is that even this language still leaves an open-ended potential for a review of zoning ordinance regulations to determine if amendments are necessary. And that's just so open-ended. I mean, the amendments could be quite restrictive on the existing truck use in the industrial park. And without further certainty over exactly what's proposed, we just can't support the programs, and in fact are concerned that they really could limit existing operations in the park. But we do appreciate staff's willingness to discuss that item with us.
Carolyn?
I have a question for staff. Has this letter been presented to our city attorney?
It has not, but the concerns that were raised in the letter have been discussed with the city attorney. And there was no specific recommendation from him in terms of a legal requirement to amend the policy or delete the policy. So that was his feedback from an email that carried the same substance of the letter.
So what went on in terms of revising HD2B?
Well, I think in staff's opinion, I think the point of balance between balancing the needs of the existing industrial and commercial areas that exist and creating a suitable residential environment is really important. And I think the previous wording I think was really a little bit out of balance, and to the point the applicant raised when you talk about the previous language of minimizing impacts from non-residential uses. I mean, if you take that to an extreme, that minimizing impact could be zero impact.
Yeah.
So, I think that wording was a little out of balance. So what we tried to do with the program language is to make sure it's very clear that, and we're talking about doing a subsequent review that would be in front of this commission and this body to look at those standards to make sure they're suitable for an adjoining residential neighborhood. It might be that a review of those Crocker Park standards reveals that everyone's comfortable that they do an adequate job of protecting the existing residential area and there are no changes to be made. So I wouldn't presume what the result of this outcome is. I certainly understand the applicant's concern that it is an open door and they're worried something will happen in the future. But, again, the point of the policy is that we think it's good planning to make sure there's a balance between creating maintaining that viable economic use of Crocker and making sure the residential area we create doesn't create a source of friction in the community down the road for incompatibility.
I actually think that HD2B is very well written, and I really don't think, unless I'm missing something here that is an open-ended, I don't think it prevents those two NCRO and NCRO2 1 and 2 districts from continuing their business, as well as allowing our long-term goal of affordable housing. So I really don't see in this language the concern that applicant is bringing before us. I don't read it this way unless I'm missing something.
Alan?
Sure.
Because I feel the same way. I think it's well written too, so help us understand where you're coming from.
Sure. I mean, two points is the first point is that even though we certainly appreciate the addition of the language at the end about establishing suitable environments while maintaining long-term viability of uses, our concern is that anytime you introduce residential uses into a commercial light industrial environment, over time in some communities they've seen those industrial uses eroded, right? Because residents move in and then there are concerns. So at this point, when we're starting off, right, with an affordable housing overlay, where we think that the initial study already has excellent policies in place to protect existing residents, and the concern is that if we then do the affordable housing overlay now, and then down the road have another process to determine whether there should be further amendments to the zoning, then at that time there could be a real erosion of DCT's ability to contribute to the tax base and retain its existing business in a way that is profitable and helpful to the city. So instead, we'd like to, our position is that there's already sufficient measures to protect the residential uses in the initial study and in existing regulations. There's just no need to open up another opportunity down the road to potentially infringe on the existing uses in the commercial park. And then I guess just one other point is there's also 2A. We've talked about 2B more because of the staff revisions.
2A.
But 2A also provides pretty broadly, consider zoning map / ordinance amendments for non-residential sites in the immediate vicinity of the new housing overlay to encourage compatible uses and development. And compatible uses and development are to some degree in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, some people they think of light industrial commercial and they think it needs to be a long way from residential and that there can't be much use there at all. Other people recognize that there are a lot of measures that can really allow residential and commercial to be nearby. And our concern is that this one is just an open-ended invitation to down the road, after the city's already embarked on this housing overlay, to down the road consider additional restrictions that could make it difficult for DCD to continue operation. And we're not saying that anyone in this commission or city council would set out with that goal, but just by putting these policies, these programs in the housing element, it potentially could launch that down the road. And so that's why we think it's much cleaner, given that the initial study already has a number of programs referenced that will protect residential users in this area, to strike those two programs. And with that, then we'd be very open to the housing overlay.
But the thing is that when you strike this, then get rid of the housing overlay altogether. If you strike these two, then the whole idea was to open up these areas for the affordable housing. And if you remove that, then there is no opportunity for that, right?
Well, defaults.
Or defaults.
To the existing ordinance.
And the idea here was to be open up these areas for affordable housing. And I cannot forecast in the future what's going to happen. We can forecast anything we want. You're looking at the worst case scenario, but it may not be the case. So I really don't think in my mind that we should remove this. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact on your concerns, what you're talking about. That's my opinion.
David?
Through the chair,
Yes.
I just want to, since the one issue that wasn't raised in the staff report was the issue of program HD2A, and when I read them together, I don't know that 2A actually materially adds a lot of clarity. I think it could be argued as kind of confusing between A and B, and so. I certainly wouldn't object to the deletion of policy A. Policy B, I think, gets to the heart of the matter as far as staff's concerned. So.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'd be good with that, too.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Would that be helpful?
That would certainly help.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, So, I'm sorry, John, if I missed it, but so when does the review of the existing ones, the ordinances, come into play as far as determining if the amendments are necessary?
Again, there's a time frame set forth, the end of 2018.
2018. Yeah. Oh, okay. There. Sorry, I didn't see it at the end. Okay. So, I'm not a big fan of general words like suitable, and being on subcommittee for, different subcommittees, we deal with this all the time, vague, words like that, and it's more aspirational, like make sure we have some kind of guidelines, but I wouldn't be opposed to defining suitable, through the review process. I don't want to just eliminate 2B. The balance, if there was enough balance, I'm sure city staff would not have the need to put, to adjust the verbiage. So I agree as far as using general terms or open-ended, like suitable. What does that actually mean? If that's defined, I'm sure then DCT could actually look at that and go, okay, that works or it doesn't work, next to the existing ordinances. So it would be nice to have some more definition. I think in the process that's going to happen. So I hear what you're saying. I'm supportive of the existing statement because it will be defined through the review process. So.
If you look at many of the codes, they are all full of this kind of
right. And we've come across those.
And what happens is that there is always a explanation of what suitable means or whatever I'm used to this kind of language throughout my career, and so I think the next step would be that if the concern is raised, at that point the staff and planning commission can work together and define what suitable means at that point.
Yeah, agreed. Right, exactly. And so I'm supportive, deletion of 2A, but and remaining with the process to review the ordinances and define suitable, within that.
John, would you do me a favor and read 2A for me again? Because I don't have the actual text in front of me.
Oh, okay. It's actually, apologize. It's part of the full housing element.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't bring that.
So basically 2A is to consider zoning map/ordinance amendments for non-residential sites in the immediate vicinity of the new mixed-use affordable housing overlay and residential affordable housing overlay to encourage compatible uses and development.
Which page is that on?
It was on page 6-15 of the draft 2015-22 housing element dated August 28th. Page 6-15.
Yep, got it.
My thinking is that when you read HD 2B, it falls into a larger context that maybe perhaps the case you're presenting or the worst case scenario that you're presenting is not taken into consideration. And I feel that our duty is to provide for that balance, and that may require such broad language as amendments or suitability environments or maintaining. Basically, the definition of the situation is going to bring it before the commission anyhow. So I'd much rather have this be a projection of the balance that we would like to create, and I actually read it as supplement and complementary to the rest of the text. So I don't see that as actually being removed and putting an extra, protection on the overlay that you're suggesting. So my interpretation actually is the other end of the spectrum, which says that the amendments that we're talking about is in keeping with the previously defined context of the entire housing element and the spirit of it. So I actually don't see this as an additional component that will provide or possibly interfere with the commercial uses currently used or used in the future. So that happens to be my my position on it. But I do appreciate that your points. And having read 2A, I think that 2B is more significant and actually gets to, as John said, the heart of the matter. So I would propose that we hold on to 2B, and I'm okay with eliminating 2A.
Yep.
Carolyn?
I think HD2B defines it well enough. I think HD2A is confusing, so there's not enough definition there too. That's pretty open-ended, and it'd be hard to understand.
Okay.
Are the only comments? I think I know where the applicant's coming from relative to this, because I have a feeling about this myself, having witnessed several situations in San Francisco where we ended up with residential and commercial, light industrial, bars, restaurants, whatever, who had been there for a long, long time, being displaced because when the residents moved in, they complained about X, Y, and Z. So somewhere in this, we need some mention that by changing this, we do need to protect the rights of the property owners from those kind of things. I don't know how we put that in, but I do believe that's the spirit of this argument. And I would hate to think that, moving forward, we may have companies that are already in these spaces who want to stay, and even if the buildings are completely demolished and rebuilt for whatever reason, they move back in, that it's not going to be an issue for, say a long-standing renter of one of these properties. I think that's the spirit of your argument. Is that correct?
Certainly, we would want to be able. Anybody in that park would want to stay as an existing tenant. We would want to be able to stay, and also ensure that their operations aren't really restricted, because that's another concern. Is even those who can stay, sometimes operations are restricted in a way that makes it harder to run the business.
Right. Then one of the actions for the city council will be to determine whether residential is going to be okay given the current businesses that are there, right?
Well, it's certainly part of the kind of equation, and
Right.
Again, as we
Right there.
we know from going through this months and months and months, there's not necessarily a lot of other easy sites to say, well, let's relocate the housing to.
Right.
We've already looked at multiple sites in town as to where the housing to meet our state obligation
Yep.
can go and makes sense to go. So, I think we understand it's kind of a delicate balance, and that's what we're really trying to catch here is the nuance. I would only, suggest that to get to the chair's point, I think ultimately the city will be better served and the property owners will be better served if the city goes through a very conscious effort of going through the development standards and basically ratifying them and saying, yeah, these make sense relative to this change in condition with adjacent residential, as opposed to leaving them be and then something comes up later, oh, the city didn't even consider this. Nobody looked at whether or not these changes would have an effect on our homes, our new housing or whatever. So I think actually the proactive effort of the city to look at our development standards will serve everyone better in the long run.
Yeah.
So we looked at that, we considered that, we decided these standards were sufficient. No one can guarantee that someone 10 years from now, if something gets built out there, won't complain about something.
They will.
That's a given. But all we can do is, I think, do our due diligence, do the best to balance it and get it out there in the record that we went through this exercise and did the best we could at the time.
Okay. Did you have any other comments?
No, just thank you all for your consideration. And again, as I think you've already hit on, 2A is our biggest concern, though we still would request that both programs be stricken. But certainly taking out 2A would be a big help.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
David?
Hello, my name's Dave Hogan, and I'm the regional manager for DCT. And I wanted to come up and talk because a couple of you weren't here last time, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit for your benefit.
Thank you.
We own 11 buildings in Crocker Park, and we've owned them for many years, coming on 10 years, I believe. I've been with the company 3 years, and we've done a pretty good job of taking what was kind of half-empty buildings and in pretty bad shape 3 years ago, and we spent a lot of money fixing the tenant improvements, the interior improvements, painting them, making sure the landscaping's looking good. So we feel like we've been really good stewards of the property. As you guys know, institutions buy and sell property all the time. We are a buy and hold company, and our goal is to return dividends to our investors. And they could very well be in your 401ks. They could be in your mutual funds. So what I wanted to point out was that I feel we've been a really good community partner, and we've worked with John for years and Ken also for years on various things. And when this came up, we said, hey, this is fine. We get it. You know, you guys need to have affordable housing somewhere. We're okay with that. We understand that things change. And our biggest concern was whatever change happens, it just can't impact the TC1 zoning and the tenants that are in the park. And just people should be able to carry on with their business as they've been doing for the last 10 years, in some cases 20 years in your city. So a couple days before the previous Planning Commission hearing, these two provisions were added. And to me, they were exactly what I was worried about in terms of having uncertainty with the uses in the future. So I want to kind of talk to your point. You guys all live here, obviously, and you have front yards, you have backyards. So if somebody's passed an ordinance today that said, we can restrict what it is you can do in your backyard, so you can no longer grow tomatoes, or you can no longer grow flowers, or you'd say, well, wait a minute, wow, that's crazy, right? Why would you change what I can do in my backyard? So it may be a silly analogy in a sense, but I look at it as really kind of the same thing. You're used to using your property a certain way and expect actually no changes to it at all. You get to paint your building whatever color you want, do whatever you want on the inside for the most part, as long as you have a permit. And so we're just asking for the same, I guess, respect, for lack of a better word. And we are concerned, as you pointed out, that someone will come along down the road and it will impact the users that are in the park. And so what I've suggested, and I've talked to John about it, and the reason we're here is because John and I are not on the same page on these 2 points, is there's other ways to deal with this. You could take these 2 provisions out completely and just focus on your design guidelines for the residential. There are ways to buffer residential against other uses. It's done all the time. Make sure your parking lots are adjacent to the industrial uses. I suggested that you expand the overlay zone and let's make Valley the buffer, and just say, hey, everything this side of Valley could be someday residential, and just get rid of these 2 provisions. And that way it would be organic and let economics drive it. And then when you get the Valley, you're done. That's it. And across the street is industrial, and that seems to be very manageable to me. So I just think there's other ways to do this. And so I'm here kind of repeating myself a little bit from last time, but appealing to you guys just to say these are doors in which someone will walk through later, and all of us probably won't be here when it happens, but they are avenues for change that I just don't think is fair. And that's my appeal to you guys. And think about your backyard, think about your front yard. I think to take the ambiguity out of this document is really important right now, because it gets uncontrollable at some point. Somebody will pull this out someday and say, well, we're entitled to review this and restrict the uses next door, and that's what's going to happen. So I just say, just take it off the table. There's other ways to deal with this. So, and I wanted to answer any questions that may have come up since the last time I talked.
Jamil, any questions?
I'm thinking.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm curious if staff can respond to the suggestions that he made.
Well, certainly the one in terms of housing overlay out to Valley
Right.
would certainly involve the creation potentially of many, many more units than we would need to achieve our RENA numbers. That's certainly never been the policy direction here, is to overzone for residential. So, and it also would involve a number of stakeholders who haven't been actively engaged, because, you know, obviously there was no discussion with individual property owners beyond the ones targeted, you know, in the proposal in terms of this issue. So, you know, I think the idea of overzoning, I think, is ultimately not productive at this particular stage. It might be that in the future and probably at some point in the future, that's a very logical place. You know, if you were going to develop more of a town corridor and a town center, that becomes, you know, Park and Valley become a very logical sort of area that could be more institutional, residential in nature, as opposed to industrial. But I don't know if we're there yet. We don't need to be there yet for purposes of our housing element. And the other point about that the residential bears some responsibility, I think that's absolutely the case in terms of protecting themselves from, the impacts of industrial use. I think it's both sides of the equation. You need to, when we create this overlay zone, that will obviously be a big issue, is we want to, again, provide development standards that do exactly what Dave is suggesting. But I think it really isn't in tandem. Are there some minor tweaks we need to make to these development standards for Crocker, plus what we do with the residential property to maximize compatibility? Because that's really my concern, given being in my office and the years of issues of, the Ridge and what happens down in Crocker and these kind of ongoing issues with land use compatibility. If we don't ask the question today or as part of this, that's great. That doesn't mean the issue is not going to come up later. The fact that we don't ask it and we don't go through the exercise doesn't mean it's going to not come up later. And that's, I think, part of it. I'd rather be out in front of that and proactive about it as opposed to doing something and then again being accused, well, you didn't think about this, you didn't really give this due diligence or thought, and now we need to upset the apple cart because somebody was derelict in their responsibilities at the time when they made these changes. And that's where I don't want to be or my successor to be at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
And I don't know how viable increasing the district is, but I had a question for John. Is all residential zone land in the city built on today?
Basically, yes.
Okay, so it's not unusual for towns to have land that's zone residential that's not developed yet, and that's effectively what you'd have with a larger district. You'd have land there for future growth, even though it's not mandated by the state. It's there. There's no harm, no foul in that. Number two is if you expanded the zone, that would include 4 more buildings. I own 2 of them, so it's not a big. I'm for it. So if majority rules, I own most of the buildings in the district. So it seemed to me like a very simple thing.
You don't know our town, though. I mean, we don't want to make more than we need to make.
Okay, and I don't understand that concept.
Right.
So it seems very logical to me that you'd have excess capacity. So that's the part that's a little lost on me. So
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
That's why we're here.
yeah.
That's
Have
why
this
we.
discussion.
Right. Caroline, Fun, did you have any comments, questions here?
No, not at this time. So, getting back to what Mr. Hogan said, this was written up just a few weeks ago, this particular program HD2B, or is that really not true?
Not being the primary author, I really couldn't say when it was actually drafted. I would certainly agree with David that it wasn't highlighted and focused on and provided to DCT in advance of probably the housing element in its entirety. So it was probably outed when the housing element was published. That would be accurate.
It wasn't included in the original package. It was a revision.
Understood.
But it's here, so that's
Right.
why we're here. So,
Right.
Well, I understand your concerns because I live at the Ridge, and I do know that the homeowners at the Ridge that are on Silver Spot do seem to have a lot of, they like to have a lot of sleep. It's a quiet little neighborhood, and they'd like some sleep. And the trucks going through are loud, and this has been going on for several years. But I never really thought that this particular area was going to have the problems that the Ridge is experiencing.
well,
Because
I'm sorry.
because basically the trucks are just sort of coming around the corner, all night long.
Those are the trucks that are affecting the Ridge?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and actually one of the people that one of the businesses that was causing most of the problems did move into a different location, which made everyone a lot happier. So,
There are, and Alan addressed this, but there are restrictions on the park, and they affect only certain portions of the park. And we're subject to some of those restrictions in terms of noise. The freight forwarding restriction is something that got put on after the zoning was put in place. So we think there are the component parts to manage this without having these two provisions. That's kind of our argument. And we're specifically talking about this. I mean, we haven't. There's a lot of things going on here in this housing element that we could talk about that is just not in context. So we focus on these two issues. I just think that get rid of them. We're happy. You guys can move on and approve it and send it to the state. And I think you got plenty of controls. It just makes me nervous that we don't know what's going to happen. It is the door that somebody's going to walk through.
So you were saying there are several component parts that would address the issue that this is addressing here?
Yeah, I think my point is that Crocker Park's been around long enough, and everybody's been living with it long enough where the really annoying things about Crocker Park have been addressed. They exist in various ordinances. So there's a freight forwarding ordinance limitation that was passed after. There's a what's the document, John, where it limits nighttime use, nighttime hours? Okay, it is. It's part of TC1? Okay. So we think the zoning ordinance works. And we are hoping that it not be changed. And so these two provisions, now one, I guess we're all on board on that.
we're on board on one.
Allows for additional changes, and we're just saying, I still want to plant flowers in my backyard, so please leave it alone.
But if you look at the HD2B, all it is saying is review, and if amendments are necessary to establish, it's not saying that we are,
Both sides.
we are not saying that we are establishing some kind of amendments. This one is just requiring you to review it.
Okay, and you're right, but what people do when they read this, the fact that it's here means that it was contemplated and it must be okay to pursue.
No, I don't see it that way.
That would certainly be my argument.
No, I think it is necessary for us to review it, even the overall picture that you discussed, because we need to review the current existing ordinance to see how it's going to affect if we bring the housing nearby, not even your area, but nearby. It's necessary to review that.
Right, so what you're saying is that we're going to take houses and we're going to put them in an industrial park, and because you've done that, now it affects the industrial park, right? That's
Or vice versa.
Yeah, it does represent both sides.
Yeah.
So right, and I'm saying manage it through the additional element that you're introducing, which is the residential. Do it through the design guidelines on the residential. Don't impose more restrictions on TC1. That's my request.
I really don't see any restriction here.
Yeah, I mean, taking 2A out, I think, and leaving.
I really don't see the restrictions here.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't see it. I don't follow your analogy in this particular, that not to grow carrots in my backyard.
So,
no.
so okay, let me make it a little more pointed. If there was part of this housing element said, we will review what you can grow in your backyard from time to time, and you'd say, well, why is that in there? What has my backyard got to do with this? Or then isn't that raise the issue, and doesn't it also increase the odds that somebody is going to review what it is you're growing in your backyard?
I don't see that.
You don't see that?
No.
I think it could increase the odds, but it also has, maintaining, maybe there's stronger verbiage instead of maintaining, preserving. I don't know, but when you look at this, it's really saying we want to do our due diligence and make sure we're also maintaining the long-term viability of nearby pre-existing commercial and industrial properties.
We're not eliminating that at all. Yeah.
What? Yeah.
I'm not
So
saying that we eliminate.
no, it's but maybe more focus needs to be put on that, but I think it's really saying we need to do our due diligence as far as the residential side, but we're definitely looking to preserve or maintain what's there now, and we do value the businesses here. I mean, I want to say that first of all. We should have said it up front. I mean, we do. We're all a family. We've been, have a relationship with, the city staff and the city in general and the residents, and we rely on each other. So, I don't think that's the question. I think it's just doing due diligence as far as the overlay. And, I think taking 2A out helps a lot. And maybe we need to reinforce the second part of the statement in 2B, where we're maintaining, again, I'll repeat it, while maintaining the long-term viability of nearby pre-existing commercial and industrial properties. If, back to like your analogy, like, okay, if I'm selling flowers as a business in my backyard, I could easily come up and say, if you stop me from growing flowers, I'm not going to be able to run my business. And that would be something that would then push against, a pre-existing business.
And you know how this works, right? So you're selling flowers, and you sell your house to you, and you don't want to grow flowers to sell. You want to do something else, right? Well, you've lost your right to grow flowers. It's a degradation of use that happens with this stuff. It's you allow you change the rules, and you say, okay, well, everybody that doesn't conform today falls under non-conforming. And then as soon as the user moves out, then there's triggers in that then say, okay, well, you'll lose the right to do that because we don't really like that. Mm-hmm. But we're going to give you a little time to figure it out. Well, some of those ordinances are written well, and some of them not so well. And so my fear is that we just go down that path where pretty soon you can't grow anything in your backyard because you didn't pick up the mantle and run with it, right? You don't want flowers anymore. You want to grow.
But all it is saying is that we like to review it. We're not saying that we're going to establish some kind of amendments here.
Right.
So when the Planning Commission is ready to review that, at that point, you can make all the significant points that you're talking about, so that that's the point when we will decide whether the amendments are necessary or not. But we do not want to exclude ourselves not having that opportunity to review it. So what you're saying is don't review at all, leave it the way it is. What we're saying is review it, and if amendments are necessary, incorporate that. When we're ready to do that, at that point, you can come and make these arguments.
Okay, but what you've done is you've opened the door for the solution to be laid onto the industrial park. If you don't have this, then it pushes the onus onto the zoning ordinance of the residential. So it forces the solution to be in that, and I'm suggesting that should be your tool.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because really, it's like the industrial guys are there first, and so now you're putting the burden on them, and I think it's more fair to put the burden on the residential. And so, therefore, the design guidelines, the zoning ordinance of the residential, that needs to address these issues that you're concerned about, as opposed to laying it on the front door of people that have been there for 20 years. It seems a little lopsided to me.
John. Yes.
Just through the chair, I want to offer two more sort of observations, and then I'll zip my lip until I'm asked. I think this policy being there or not, as you know, the city council always has the right to open the zoning ordinance regulations and review them and modify them at any time. So, a policy being in here or not being in here certainly isn't any kind of insurance that the council couldn't open that at any time in the future. So I know the Planning Commission's aware of that. Mm-hmm. And the second point I would bring up is that by inclusion of policy 2B is really the only place that I'm aware of that actually sort of promotes the idea of in policy form, promoting the long-term viability of the industrial park in the context of doing housing. So you strike that policy, you strike that underlying assumption. And again, maybe you'll understand it and the people in this room will understand it, but 5 years from now, whoever's reading this document may not have the same interpretation. So I just point that out to you.
I was thinking, reading this document, that it works better for the zoning we're thinking of rather than the form-based zoning that we were looking at before. But I'm not sure if that's the case to read it that way or not, but that was just my thought.
Okay, can we move on?
Because there would be more oversight on, as the developers develop, to bring it to us. Whereas the form-based, we would give them guidelines and they pretty much could run with them. I don't know how you are thinking.
I think we'd want to be in a position where on the new housing overlay zone, we would want to establish what those parameters are that maximize consistency, land use buffering and compatibility, not leave it up to an individual developer. And then once they understand what the city expectations are, then it's easy for them to develop to that as opposed to them coming up with their own solution. So I think we'd still be looking at the same proactive approach, whether it's form-based code or some other zoning tool, I'm not sure, but it's the same point.
Okay.
So when you review any particular case, let's just say we take a case and then we review it, it says here review the zoning ordinance regulations for TC1. That already includes nighttime use, right? Which means it's just referencing back to other ordinances which would be complementary to this and not in addition to.
And I think the point of this is at a separate session, and probably in tandem or once the residential zone is established. I think that's probably makes a lot more sense of when you actually go through this exercise, either in tandem with the residential overlay or after that's been developed, because then you understand, okay, what have you been able to design away, what are the design solutions you've been able to impose on the residential issues? And then you look at what are the existing constraints or limitations on the TC1 zone. And then are there any gaps of regulatory gaps that we think need to be covered to maximize or facilitate a higher level of consistency that can be achieved? So it might be that the answer is no between the nighttime regulations and the freight forwarding regulations and the setbacks from tanks and this and that, which are already in the code. Maybe we decide those all standards plus what we've been able to achieve with the residential overlay zone provides a perfectly good, workable, situation, and we're good. That's
So it doesn't.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So it doesn't overburden any one party. It requires an understanding and consideration of all current regulations in addition to HD2B and how it affects both the residential and the commercial.
That's the goal.
So, right. So, okay. So it doesn't lay it on any one person's doorstep, right?
We already have regulations that if there's a certain level of sound, that the residential buildings are built in such a way to protect the residents inside their building at night so that the sound is effectively muted. And that's already in the regulations, although I think that the sound between the different floors is not muffled enough, but I think we do have that in there already. So that would protect the industrial area, I would believe, too.
Certainly that in energy requirements with window, double pane window, all these are going to, so again, that's where we're back to what factors are going to be built in, hardwired into the zoning for the residential, what are the current TC1 standards? I mean, and the problem is nobody, we haven't had the luxury of, as part of putting this entire document together, to go through this exercise in its entirety, right? That's kind of the point. This is a placeholder. This is something we think should be done, as part of an implementation program. This isn't, we're talking about a lot of higher level of detail that, we'd like to spend some time on this and make sure we do it right, frankly, because if we don't do it right, this community is going to bear a burden for a long time, including the industrial area, frankly, and then that's part of our concern is to make sure that is protected and doesn't create this sort of backlash against, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. And because, as we talked about, there are a lot of ways the city could handle the zoning, even with the overlay, the residential, kind of how you impose residential or allow for residential, two very different words, right? Impose or allow. And we've very much tried to take a very flexible approach and allow the property owners a lot of land use flexibility to take advantage of the market, not imposing requirements on them. And, this is just part of that theme as well.
Well, I have to say that reading it, it seems to me that it is actually protecting the ability of the land use that already exists. And, whoever's going to come in and build is going to have to prove that they are going to be able to build in such a way that the commercial businesses are allowed to stay the same way, and that's the way I read it. We could run it by the lawyer and see what he says. What do you think, the city attorney?
Yeah, I'd actually be amenable to that. I mean, when we first had this conversation, right at the beginning, my first comment was that the only way I could see this being feasible and fair and right is if there were no take intentions. Mm-hmm. And even though this is written fairly well, I understand the concerns of the property owners, and that was right from the get-go. What we were discussing was that there was, no take intentions. If we were going to degrade in any way, shape, or form the ability of the current property owners to run their businesses or whatever, that we had a very different discussion. So obviously that's still a concern for a large property owner in the industrial park, and I don't think we can ignore that even if we think this is really well written. So I think we should run this by the attorney with that in mind, with that specific thought process in mind.
Yeah, certainly we'll share this beyond the email. We'll share this with the city attorney and,
right.
Because otherwise I don't feel comfortable that we've done our job on this, because that was, really what we discussed right at the beginning.
That was our intention.
Yes.
Is if we put something in on Park Lane, that first of all, we felt that this particular area was in fact would be less bothered by Crocker than even some of the other places that have been built. So, like certain parts of Swallowtail, and that was part of the reason that we wanted to approach you and see if you were interested in allowing this to go forward, because we felt this was a viable area. So we certainly want to make certain that the business community
may I suggest that we can move on now and bring this to the
we still have another speaker, so no, we're not moving on.
Yeah, no, with this part here.
So can we make a note to do that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret, thank you for being patient. I felt this was a better way to hear things out. Now you've got all the information from the building owners as well.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. My name is Margaret Doss Brown, and I live at 25 San Benito Road here in town. And I was just wondering if there was any consideration in the housing element for substandard lots that are less than 5,000 square feet, as far as for...
Could you actually speak closer to the microphone, because I can't hear you, which means nobody else can.
That you take into consideration some of the substandard lots in town, as far as allowing for maybe additional housing, affordable housing in the area, as long as they meet the proper restraints or, I don't know the word I'm using, for if they want to develop the property and maybe put a secondary unit on it, and they meet all the requirements as far as parking and setbacks and so forth, if that would be considered in the housing element.
It has been, John. Ken, do you want to speak to that, please?
Yes, Margaret and I have talked a little bit about this, and so if I can paraphrase, the suggestion is to allow for secondary dwelling units on lots. Currently, the requirement is 5,000 square feet or more, but the question she raises is why not open that up to smaller lots that would provide the parking? There are some cases where you have a lot that maybe it's just a little less than 5,000. It could be quite a bit less even, but it's got special circumstances where it actually does have adequate parking, and the question would be why should 5,000 square feet be the driver if we can provide low-income housing through these units. And there is a program in the element that actually speaks to this a little bit. Is program HB1E, and I'll read the first part of it, is to encourage development of secondary units, and then it's got a list of several items, and if it's the Commission's pleasure, item F could be added to say explore the potential of reducing or eliminating the lot size minimum for development of SDUs or secondary dwelling units. So it's not saying that it will definitely be done, but at least to explore it along with these other items when that comes up for zoning text amendment. So it's something that staff does not see an issue with, but it's up to the Commission's pleasure.
I don't see any problem adding that.
Problem.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with
No
that either.
objection.
We're just exploring, we're not saying anything like we're going to do it.
Margaret, does that address your...
That's what the request was.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll take a look at it.
Okay,
All right, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank
you.
For your time.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, we'll close the public hearing unless anyone else would like to speak.
I propose to close the public hearing.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank
What is your pleasure?
I'm ready to send it
To the
to City
council
Council for review.
with the elimination of HD2A and adding H2, revised HD2B.
Right. With comments about,
And also another comment regarding the,
okay.
And the secondary housing,
yeah.
Right.
So I make a motion to, do we have to make a motion, right?
Make a motion to adopt draft resolution GPA-1-14-A.
Yes,
Right?
right.
Have a second?
That's with the amendments that we just talked
With the
about.
amendments.
Okay, with
that
the
we just-
amendments, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to items initiated by staff.
You may or may not be aware that our city attorney is got another job and he's leaving the city effective. I think tomorrow is his last day, actually. So
Wow.
we'll be having a new city attorney who's been hired, and actually from the same firm. It's someone else with that firm, and so they'll be representing us at other functions. He's already been in the loop on, for example, the housing element a little bit, and he'll be the individual who will be commenting and reviewing this material. Just wanted the commission to be aware of that.
Is he up to speed with the environmental impact?
He has a lot of land use. That's probably one of his strengths in terms of background is land use in CEQA.
But did he review all the stuff that we have so far regarding the EIR for
Oh, the
Baylands?
Baylands, he's in the catch-up. I'd say he's in the catch-up mode at this point. Yeah,
This was very quick tunnel.
he'll be
Happened.
he'll be a busy man for a while.
And this is a provisional selection for a while.
I'm sorry?
Is he permanent or is?
Permanent, yes, yeah.
Oh, he was hired as a permanent. Okay. And what is his name?
Michael Roush.
Oh.
Are you going to bring him over here or something?
Actually, yes, when he's kind of gets settled and situated, we'll have him come to meet with the commission, and that'd be good opportunity.
We also like you to comment on the EIR reviews. What's happening with that?
Oh, the EIR, the final EIR. I think the publication date, we're still trying to keep it to this calendar year. So working to get it published by the end of the calendar year. I do have some
supposed to come
information
before us soon, right? And
well, I think there's a whole. What I'm going to be doing is forwarding some material to the Planning Commission. I don't know if any of the commissioners watched the last council meeting.
Yeah, I wanted to know.
There was a discussion about some Baylands larger process kind of questions and issues, and I want to make sure you get that, and we might want to agendize that as just a discussion item, so you can kind of start thinking about what the next year or so of your lives is going to be like.
Good.
And also, I want to ask you about the appeal. I wasn't here, so what happened to that? Did the council hire the consultant, or what? Approved to hire the consultant?
They approved that the proposals are due Monday, so we'll see if we get anyone to bid on it. I don't know if anyone's going to do the work or not, but we did send out the RFPs, and hopefully we'll get a response.
I'm a little lost. What?
It's regarding the appeal for that.
There was, through the chair, when the appeal was transmitted, basically presented to the entire council, there was a following or a subsequent recommendation that the city hire an architect to do essentially
for this
review for the 7,000 Marina
okay,
appeal as to, the both the architectural significance of the building and the changes proposed, as well as alternatives that might be considered, if there are any feasible alternatives that would achieve the project proponents' objectives while still maintaining the basic building form. So those are the two charges that the RFP was asked the firm to do. And that would inform the council's appeal decision.
So anybody bid on that yet?
No.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, moving on to items initiated by the commission, subcommittee updates. We had our green building meeting. Dave, are you ready to give the lowdown on that?
Well, I can just kind of summarize what Doug Ryder, the building official, came up with. We have a letter from him here. And, the good news is, the building code's changed, and he's saying that, I should just take one step back and say briefly, so the subcommittee meeting is there to kind of look at the redrafting the city's green building ordinance, so we can kind of pump things up and create more better standards for green building. And with the code change, recent code change, we had a really good discussion about this with Doug Ryder, and his statement was, and I agree with this too, is that the state code now encompasses kind of all the new development and remodels, like he says here, and that we were, considering, and goes beyond what the subcommittee was looking at, with Build It Green and LEED and the different standards we're trying to kind of combine with the current code. So his recommendation is to wait and let things settle so we can kind of catch up with the code and see how that plays out before we start integrating other systems that may actually work against us. And that's where we left it. I don't know if we have another meeting scheduled.
No, but I have a couple of additional comments.
But it was a good discussion.
It was a great discussion. A couple of the things that were really interesting from Doug were that Belmont actually adopted Tier 1, which is what we were looking at, which was the highest standard. And they had to very quickly repeal that because
Within a few weeks.
within a few weeks they had to repeal it because technology and the law are not on the same page. So the law might say you need to have purple widgets that are 3 inches wide. Well, the fact of the matter is that purple 3-inch wide widgets are not yet manufactured. So they had to pull that back very, very quickly because the codes were so high. There are not any manufacturers out there that have the pieces to put it all together. And also, one of his comments was, "You make a law, I'll definitely abide by that law." But some of these new laws are so stringent that, say, for example, somebody wanted to do a simple bathroom remodel in their home, and if they had 3 bathrooms, some of these would trigger the fact that every toilet in the house would have to be replaced to low-flow toilets. So we were kind of opening up this can of worms. Somebody might just need to replace a toilet, and all of a sudden this financial burden's put on them that they've got to replace every toilet in their house. So the law and the reality of things are not settled yet, and so that's why, Doug's recommendation was that, go with what the state wants and nothing more at this point. So it was a very interesting meeting. When is our next meeting, do we know?
October 15th.
I think it's October 15th. All right. Is there any other items the commission wants to talk about?
I've been going back and forth to Sacramento to help my son fix his house. So next few meetings, I will be calling long distance to you guys, see whether I can make it or not. So I hope you will accommodate me.
As long as you're following the state's current codes.
Yeah, as long as, I'll try my best.
Tier 1.
Okay, Tier 1, but I don't want to go beyond 70 miles per hour speed to get here. So I try to make it as quick as possible. Sometimes if I'm late, I hope you will accommodate me.
Okay.
I don't want to miss the meetings.
Right.
So.
And something I have omitted to do, which I will do right now, is to say that anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council no later than 15 calendar days or 10 calendar days for subdivision and sign applications after the Commission's action. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. For additional information, please contact the Community Development Director at 508-2120 in the 415 area code. And if there is nothing else anyone has to say, I will adjourn to the regular meeting of September 25th, 2014 at 7:30 p.m.
You have to make a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Right,
Aye.
second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A lot worse.